Let's have a little chat. Since I started making Genshin videos, I've learned a few things, namely how segregated the Genshin community is. Not divided, segregated. That's a very important distinction, and I'll explain what I mean in more detail later. For now, let's look at some examples to demonstrate what I mean when I say the community is segregated. I've been getting quite a lot of comments lately along the lines of, everyone knows this, and no one is saying that. But I also get a lot of comments that ask questions about these things that other comments say that about. So obviously not everyone knows what you might think they know. And that's not to rag on anyone saying that, you just can't know what you don't know. In the case of players that are learning and asking questions, they didn't know certain mechanics, and that's fine. They're engaging and putting forth an effort to learn. That's great. In the case of players that say everyone knows this, they don't know that other players don't have the knowledge they have. This can only happen when players aren't exposed to the same type of content. If you primarily watch the Jeff, it's pretty unlikely the algorithm will feed you Sekka. If you watch Sekka, you're probably not going to be exposed to the Jeff. But if you know both of them, you know that it's like they're playing two entirely different games. It's not as simple as casual versus hardcore, lore versus gameplay, or waifu over meta. You might think that the former in all of those debates just don't care about learning how the game works, but from seeing my comments, it's pretty apparent that they are interested in learning how the game works. They're just looking for someone to teach it in a non-judgmental way. Think of it like being in school and being too embarrassed to ask a question. So you wait until after class or when the teacher isn't busy. The sad state of the community is that for players that want to learn, they essentially have to look for smaller channels like mine to get the answers they need. They know that if they go to the comments for larger channels, they either won't get an answer or at worst, they'll be ridiculed for asking. That said, I'm not saying, stop saying everyone knows that. If you already know it, I'm not making the content for you anyway. Far from it. I'm primarily making my content for you. You see, a consequence of players that want to learn how the game works resorting to smaller channels to avoid being judged for asking questions is that it can cause them to wind up at channels that give out information that's just incorrect. Remember, you can't know what you don't know. If you already know, let's say, how level 90 affects certain characters, you just aren't going to be exposed to the videos still being released that say it's a trap. If you don't know, it's pretty likely you will. And if not, you'll be fed content from early in the game's life when no one knew how the game worked. If it's considered a solved issue, more reputable channels aren't going to retread old ground. So how does that equate to me making videos primarily for players that do already know what I'm saying? Think about it like this. You know that pressing the power button on a TV remote will turn on a TV. Everyone knows that. But do you know why pressing the power button turns on the TV? Could you explain it to someone if they asked? Genshin mechanics are often pretty similar to that scenario. Most players may know that Hyper Bloom is busted, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know why. I've had comments on my videos that thought Nahida was the trigger for Hyper Blooms, and I totally understand why they might think that, because I've seen videos where people say it. Hell, one of my favorite content creators with over 500,000 subscribers has no clue how the game works, bless his heart, and while the majority of his subscribers are well aware of that, most people that see his videos have no idea. They hear Nahida is the trigger, see him clear Abyss, and say, oh, Nahida must be the trigger. Now, how would you approach clearing up that misunderstanding? Would you say, that's wrong, that content creator is wrong, don't listen to them, your Electro is the trigger, how do you not know that? Is that a helpful approach? If anything, it does more harm than good because the backfire effect is very real. Telling someone they're wrong, that someone they like is wrong, or presenting information with an air of superiority is really just an effective way of convincing them that they're right, or that it's not in their best interest to listen to you. That's not an issue of casual versus hardcore, that's just human nature. In my case, I want to be helpful. I want players to enjoy all the different things the game has to offer, but I know the majority of players that want to learn more about the game will never find my videos. If I'm making videos about mechanics and the game's meta, the algorithm isn't very likely to promote my video to those players. But if I can demonstrate the mechanics, how they interact with one another, and communicate them effectively, I can provide a better understanding of what players already know so they can carry the torch. I might not have the reach to be able to help everyone that's looking for advice, but I may just be able to provide the tools to enough players that they can help out when someone is looking for answers. Knowing something is fine, but developing a better understanding so you can communicate what you know is a game changer. So how do you bridge that gap without being confrontational? The best way is to encourage them to ask questions. When people ask a question, generally speaking, it means they're open to getting an answer. Don't make it about them, what they know or don't know, or anyone else they know or don't know. It's also a good practice to tell them just enough to get a glimpse at the full picture. When you leave more to discover, it encourages them to engage in their own learning. So, how do you get them to ask questions if they aren't already? Well, you ask your own questions. People really like being right, so they'll answer with what they know or think they know. You can learn a lot about a person's content knowledge through how they answer questions, and you're never made more aware of what you don't know than when you're answering a question. In the educational business, this is a pedagogical philosophy known as zone of proximal development. It's the space that makes up what someone knows, doesn't know, and can learn with a little bit of help. When you and the other person are on the same page for where they're at in that zone, it goes a long way to helping expand their content knowledge and understanding of it. That said, there are people that just aren't open to learning. That's just the state of the world, and you'll see it everywhere, even in the comments of the most reputable creators, and sometimes within the reputable creators themselves. If it at all seems like that's the case, just leave it alone. You're not their teacher. It's not like you'll have to talk to their parents or get reprimanded by the principal if they don't do well. At most, just leave the most basic, non-judgmental explanation for how things work so anyone else that sees it isn't misinformed. And leave it alone unless someone asks you a question about it, because remember, if someone asks a question, it generally means they're open to learning. To be clear, I'm not saying the problem in the community is that hardcore players are being mean to casuals. The problem is that hardcore and casual players are segregated from one another in the first place. It's two vastly different worlds. It's like Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake." You can't know what the experiences and motivations of the other side are if you're never exposed to it. And just like the bourgeoisie and the peasant class, that separation isn't because one side hates the other. The separation is there by design. The divide doesn't exist. A divide happens because both sides are in contention with one another. They have the same experiences but differing views on them. That's not what's happening in the Genshin community. The contention didn't cause the separation. The separation caused the contention. Depending on what content you watch, the algorithm is going to keep feeding you that content. You get sorted into different pockets within the community because beef equals views and how much we love confirmation bias. Eventually you're going to be exposed to one of the creators you watch having a problem with another creator or a certain type of player. You'll see comments backing them up. You'll see any sort of dissension filtered out and discouraged. That's when the illusory truth effect takes hold and you start to form opinions about people you know absolutely nothing about. And as far as you know, those opinions are correct. You have no reason to doubt them because you can't know what you don't know. And you'll never know if you're never given the opportunity to learn. Sorry if I got a little preachy. I set down to write an elemental gauge video and I was like, I need to quickly address this first because I can tell that the more comments I get saying everyone knows this, the less questions I get. I can see how it's discouraging players that would ask questions from feeling comfortable reaching out. By the time I finished the first paragraph, I was like, this is actually a pretty complicated issue and a teachable moment, so I should probably give it its own video. This was a pretty casual video to put together, so it probably won't take me as long as usual for the gauge video. I do still have a lore video in the pipeline. I just need time to actually get through all the world quests so I can dot my T's and cross my I's because it is wacky and there could be easily something in the new world quest that disproves it that I just haven't seen yet. It'll definitely be out before 4.2 though. Anyway, subscribe or click the video on screen. We're on our way to 1,000 and it'd be pretty cool to get my partnership back. Bye.